happening in food, fuel, and debt crisis. It was held on 17th of June, and we provided data on impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine, food and fertilizer prices, and their supplies, and the prediction of a serious food crisis in many countries, especially in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So to continue with the discussion, we have organized separate webinars, which will be held on topics of food, inflation, and debt, and also enable more time on each of these aspects on the global capitalistic crisis. On today's program, we are going to have our first speaker. We'll also have our reactor from Africa. Then we'll have an open forum. Then we'll have a synthesis and closing. I would also want to let you know that we have interpretation keys and how you can access the interpretation audio. Click the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom, and then choose the language that you'd like to hear. We have French and Bahasa. And then to hear the interpreted language clearly, click mute original audio. Again, I welcome you to this discussion on food crisis, and you can ask your questions using the chat box or the Q&A. At this point, I would like to invite our speaker, Ms. Razani. She is the co-chairperson of People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty. Well, we have, I'm sorry, the interpretation are for Spanish and Bahasa. We don't have French interpretation. Okay, thank you, Ms. Lai. So I would like to take this opportunity to invite our speaker, our main speaker, Ms. Razan. Kindly welcome and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Lai. On behalf of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty and the Arab Network for Food Sovereignty and the Arab Group for the Protection of Nature, I would like to thank you, the organizing committee and the ILPS Commission too, for this opportunity. It's always an honor, an inspiration, a source of hope and strength to come together as people to discuss one of the most important challenges of our time, a time where one child is going to hunger every minute, where more and more countries are going to be food insecure. In the minutes given to me, I would like to raise a few questions for us in the debate, and maybe shed some light on our region, which is considered to be the most affected by the food crisis, and then offer some conclusions. So I hope you can follow up with me so that together we can come up with a good discussion. I will try to answer some questions. Firstly, the question, is this food crisis a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that the US Air Force targeted 300 hectares of agricultural land planted with wheat crops in Syria in the year 2020? Is the explosion of the port in Lebanon and the silos of wheat is a coincidence in 2020? Are the fires that broke out in Iraq, in Salah ad-Din district, in year 2021 a coincidence? the burning of 90 acres of land in Sudan in 2020 also was unintentional. Tunisian question now whether the burned crops back in 2019 were also a coincidence. Jordanians still are wondering why their wheat silos were demolished in Aqaba port in 2018. A few weeks ago, occupation forces burned down the wheat crops in the town of Nablus, where I was born in Palestine. Was the selection of that land random? Finally, how did the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war this year coincide with the massive wildfire that erupted in Egypt to burn 76 tons of wheat this year? So this is my first question. The other one, is the food crisis new? I.e., did it start with the Ukrainian war? We all know that the global food prices have been rising over the past 20 years. The same drivers of the 2008 and 2011 food crisis, such as fuel price spikes, financial speculations, and imperialist wars, these were the drivers of increasing food prices that time. They are the same drivers increasing food prices in the year 2022. Already, uprisings in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Egypt have shown stark similarities with massive food price related protests in 2008. One of the drivers, or better framed as root causes, is the increase of farmland prices and the commodification of land, which have peaked higher in the past few decades, prompting a 122% increase in the number of transitional land deals from year 2011 to 2020. Also, in the last few months, numerous countries have signed new agreements with the rich countries like the Emirates and the Saudi Arabia for food export production and land leasing. These countries, some of these countries are Tunisia, Guyana, Tanzania, and Sudan. An agricultural company in Pakistan recently signed $1 billion deal with Chinese and Saudi Arabian companies, which will allow the country's exports to grow. Last year, a report from the International Land Coalition revealed that land concentration is much worse than we know, and the trajectory is leading to a few landlords and companies operating farmlands in poor countries. Another root cause is breakdown of the food systems due to wars, conflicts, and occupation. And my colleague Gertrude, who's a comrade since long, know that the conflict and the wars were not considered as triggers of hunger before the civil society and grassroots movements have pushed that into the platforms of negotiations. 60% of the world's hungry live in countries affected by conflict. More than half of the 124 million acutely hungry people live in parts of the world where there is conflicts and fighting and violence. Agriculture and trade are disrupted and played where in these countries, and a plate of food may cost more than a day's wages. And you can see many examples, like in Afghanistan, now we have 93% hunger. In Brazil, where they had zero hunger for one time and they alleviated hunger for millions, now that we have 60% of the families are facing hunger again. Extreme weather events driven by climate change is another factor or a root cause. It plays a role in the disruption of food production. Over the past 40 years, the planet has lost 12 million hectares of arable land each year due to the drought and desertification. 1/3 of arable land was also lost due to erosion and pollution. To add to these causes, over the past 40 years, we have witnessed a transformation towards unsustainable consumption and unhealthy diets. Meat consumption has increased drastically, which has an enormous environmental footprint and pressure on productive resources. We can list many other causes and examples for this chronic food crisis, but essential fact remains that our vulnerability to these causes is tied to our enslavement by the global market system and our ability to resist the destruction of our local food systems by colonial and neo-colonial forces, including pressures by powerful actors and international financial institutions to marginalize our agricultural sectors. Therefore, the crisis is indeed not new, but escalates more during certain global events such as COVID pandemic. Between 2020 and February 2022, FAO's food price index went up by 55.2%, led by 159% rise in prices of edible oils, followed by strong growth in prices of sugar, dairy, and cereal. Due to COVID-19, global domestic supply chains have collapsed and food supply chains haven't been spared. The pandemic unleashed a chain crisis for international shipping, with ports closed, ships remained at sea for months in a row. COVID-19 has also resulted in a major disruption to the movement of domestic and migrant workers, who have a major role in agriculture production. Freight costs have gone up sharply. Export restrictions increased during the pandemic. There were increasing concerns about food availability, which led to grain-producing countries imposing export restrictions, which had 16% share in global rice exports. Now, Vietnam, which had 16% share in global rice exports before the pandemic, held back on granting rice export certificates till the end of April 2020. Kazakhstan suspended exports of several cereal products, oilseeds, vegetables until June 2020. Russia placed the restrictions on the export of items such as wheat, corn, and corn. Consequently, food prices started picking up in the second half of the 2020, with the prices of cereals and edible oil witnessing strong growth since then. Fertilizer issue is very important. Prices have also increased in fertilizers due to the rising price of natural gas. Average monthly natural gas prices, as indicated by the World Bank's Natural Gas Index, went up by nearly 600% between June 2020 and December 2021. A big new event adding to the chronic crisis, food crisis, of course, is the current war between Russia and Ukraine. According to FAO, food prices went up by 12.4% in March 2022. From February to March, the increase was 12.4%, and it's likely that this rise wouldn't be the last, especially if the conflict drags on for a much longer time. Russia and Ukraine are the world's largest exporters of barley, corn, rapeseed, sunflower seeds, and sunflower oil, and wheat, as well as fertilizers. If we come to Ukraine, Ukraine accounts for nearly 10% of global wheat export, with a war raging on its soil, breakdown of internal transportation, and the blockage on its coastline. The country's export shipments have been disrupted. Ukraine also accounts for more than a quarter of the world's production of sunflower seed, with supply disruptions and fears of more to come Safflower oil is witnessing sharp price hikes. Continuation of the conflict also puts at risk the sowing of crops later this year in Ukraine, which will weigh on global wheat, barley, maize, rapeseed, and sunflower production. If we come to Russia, Russia too is a major agricultural exporter, with major shares in global production of sunflower, seed, barley, and wheat. It accounts for 18% of global wheat exports. The war is also driving up the cost of food production because both Russia and Ukraine used to export 28% of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers and 40% of potash. Russia alone used to export 48% of the world's ammonium nitrate and 11% of the world's urea. Soaring fertilizer prices, meanwhile, may result in lower use of fertilizers, thereby denting crop yields in major fertilizer importers. Of course, shipment from Russia and Belarus face disruption due to sanctions. Before I come to my conclusion, I will speak a little bit about the impact of food crisis on our region, the West Asia, North Arab world, we call it, as it is the least food sufficient and the biggest importer of wheat in the world. We import 30% of the global wheat market. In our region, do you still hear me?
Yes, clearly.
In our, it is, as I told you, it's the least sufficient and the biggest importer of wheat. In our region, where wheat has been first domesticated, we plant only 30% of our arable land. We have 200 million hectare of arable land. We only plant 30%, and we sadly say that this region was the first to plant wheat in the world in Iraq, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. In Egypt, where bread is named Aish, which means life, prices are rising dramatically. The country is the world's top wheat importer, with nearly 70% of its wheat coming from Russia and Ukraine in 2019. Lebanon imports 52% of its wheat from Russia. More than a third of Yemen's wheat comes from the Black Sea region. Ravaged by years of war that have pushed millions to the brink of famine, Yemen is highly dependent on bread, which makes up over half of the calorie intake for the average household. So as we see, our region, which is rich in resources, and the Africa region, where we see that 13 out of 15 countries face very, very high rates of hunger, are in Africa. So there comes to my mind another question: how come these regions, which are, and some of the Asian also regions, very high in resources, are facing higher rates of food insecurity and higher and a bigger food crisis? If we want to gather all these questions, we might have a very interesting discussion, and it will lead us to some conclusions. Some of our conclusions: that prices are at their highest level since 1990, while high food inflation impacts all of us. Low-income countries and the most vulnerable communities and families are the most affected. This includes small food producers, farmers, agricultural workers, and landless peasants, who make up more than 2/3 of the world's extremely poor. We have sought to answer two questions in this presentation. Is the crisis a coincidence, and is it new? We conclude that it's neither a coincidence, as the underlying causes are mostly man-made, and that it is surely not new, as these causes have been present prior to the Russian-Ukrainian war, and have therefore led to many previous food crises. These root causes will inevitably lead to other escalating crises in the future should we fail to tackle them. Pandemics and wars are manifestations of our vulnerability, and their painful repercussions will continue until we recognize our strengths as movements to change this narrative towards sovereign food systems. This impending crisis is merely a reminder that food sovereignty should be a priority for our social, economic, and political security. But how do we realize this vision? We have first to protect and enhance local food systems and communities' rights to own, manage resources such as land, water, and seeds. We must cultivate food staples such as wheat to improve food security and should be prioritized over crops intended for export, because we have all the attention in our region is to export rather than planting wheat for food security. We have to work to build food reserves and invest in regional strategies for food security. And we have to continue to campaign for ending wars, conflicts, and occupations. We have to work for canceling debt owed to international finance institutions and private international lenders. And we have to continue mobilizing farmer and worker organizations, indigenous peoples and women's organizations to unite and take the leadership to drive the economic transformations urgently needed. I would like here to stop and to thank you for listening. And I'm eager to listen for Gertrude's reaction and to hear the brainstorming together, to work together and to unite our efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Razani, for your very explorative presentation. We appreciate that. And at this juncture, I'll invite Ms. Gertrude Kenyagi, who will give us her reactions from Africa. She's the Director of Support for Women in Rural Areas. You're welcome.
Yes,
Ms.
thank you
Gertrude.
very much. Thank you very much, Razan, and the whole fraternity of IBON for giving me this opportunity. Well, I'm at the Africa Protected Areas Congress in Kigali, Rwanda, and it was very difficult for me to secure a place that is quiet enough for me to do a meeting. There are lots of meetings going on, but you'll forgive me if you hear any buzz in the background. Okay, yeah. When Razan speaks, I really do not have a lot to react to, because Razan and I are in total agreement concerning our food systems, concerning the injustices the farmers suffer, the family farmers suffer, and concerning the way the entire food system is run. Because in my culture, we say that when a big drum beats, a small one does not even dare to sound. So hunger is one of the biggest challenges of our time. As she observed, hunger has become an industry, has become a site of exploitation, of marginalization, where the powerful, immoral, corrupt few take power over the hardworking peasants. Razan asked the question, is the food crisis new? Of course it isn't. And when she answered it, she said 20 years, the food crisis can be traced back 20 years. And she's right. 20 years ago, the price volatility of food was not something to worry about. Until these few male-dominated corporates realized that they needed to make more profit. The hunger and thirst for profit over people and over the planet escalated to a level where they grab land, they capture means of production, they privatize, they are seeking privatized seeds through patents. It's a systematic, deliberate move to impoverish the majority who are the farmers. Can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, if you can still hear me, then that's good. Yeah. Okay, because I'm in a very noisy place. I don't even. Okay. The observation that the trajectory is leading to the concentration of land in hands of a few wealthy landlords is true. For instance, a lot of land is captured in my country and majority of countries in Africa for establishing of palm oil plantations. The extractive industry is grabbing land that's arable, that's feeding people. And they're herding people into internally displaced people's camps where they're living on handouts. In Uganda, for instance, there was an emergency of a disease. It was called nodding disease. And no one had heard of this disease before. It comes out when experts try to, to study the disease and come up with solutions. They all pointed fingers at the handout food that comes from the US, that comes from developed countries, that is given to people who ordinarily would be producing their own food. Because Uganda is an agricultural country. I'm bringing that as an example. Food price volatility is evident everywhere, coupled with climate change that has exacerbated disaster and pandemics, which, together with pandemics such as COVID, and now the Ukrainian and Russian war, has increased fuel, food, and agrochemical input costs. This shows that agricultural systems relying on synthetic inputs are susceptible and not sustainable. They failed the test. A rising population requires agricultural systems that save resources, that provide nutritious foods, and not only that, those that pollute the environment. So we are looking for those that support the farmers to keep the environment integrity. And then another thing that I gleaned from Razan's presentation was the corporate capture of our policy spaces. There's an example, a very worrying one. The case in point is the appointment of Dr. Agnes Kalibata as the president of AGRA, an organization that does not have any success to show for the times they've existed. The president of this organization, AGRA, that is pushing on the people industrialized agriculture, that is pushing on people hybrid seeds that require intensive fertilizer, chemical fertilizers, which destroy the environment, was appointed as the ambassador for the UN Food Systems Summit. It is very worrying because UN is a multilateral space. And if it's a multilateral space, it should be serving to protect the interests of the people. It should be serving to protect us against attack of corporations. But if it is exposing us to attack of corporations, that means the human rights dimension that they are supposed to be promoting is no longer there. That means that corruption has infiltrated even our own personal spaces. All hope is not lost, however. We must soldier on and claim back our sovereign spaces, which they are threatening to turn to multi-stakeholder platforms. They don't recognize the power relations what they call power now is the amount of money, amount of wealth one has in their arsenal, not the integrity. Yeah, we must fight for our indigenous seeds. We must fight for our land. We must not give up. It doesn't matter. Morality is more important than wealth. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I couldn't switch on my camera. Okay, let me see whether I can. But I'm through with the presentation. Sorry, I couldn't switch on my camera.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Miss Gertrude. We are glad to see you, and thank you for making time for this.
I'm sorry, Peter, I couldn't switch on my camera.
Okay, no problem. So now I would like to open the forum for your questions, your comments, and your insights on the food crisis. You're welcome to send in your questions or your comments. Any question?
Until we have some questions, I would like to ask Gertrude. I was observing, as I said in my presentation, that food crises are sharp in countries where they have lots of resources and colonialism has a red eye on, or for geopolitical reasons, like in Yemen, in Africa, in the Arab region. Do you find this correlation clear? No, I can't hear you.
Unmute? Yeah. Okay, I've unmuted. Yes, it is very poignant. The correlation is evident. There's empirical evidence to even support that correlation. Although I can't quote the source verbatim, but I've read studies where countries that are endowed with rich, fertile soils, with minerals, with oil and gas, have an abundance of there's a lot of fighting in those countries. Conflicts, armed conflicts, disruptions of livelihood. If you look at the DRC, for instance, even Yemen, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait,
Syria.
Yes, Syria. So it's evident everywhere. And the invasions, no one condemns them, although we have bodies such as the UN, which we put in place together so that we could coexist peacefully and harmoniously. Because it's these so-called powerful nations that are being the aggressor. For instance, in DRC, they have an abundance. I hear 80% of coltan deposits are in Eastern DRC. So because of that, that's why there's a lot of fighting there. And a lot of people are displaced. A lot of people are seeking refuge. Their lives are disrupted. So your claim is correct. There's nothing else I could add to that one. Thank you.
And we have a question from Kadir. Go ahead, Kadir. You need to unmute, Kadir.
Hello. You
Yes.
hear me? You hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Now you hear me, please?
Yes.
I can't speak. I can't speak.
Yes.
Yes.
So thanks to all of yours for this meeting. I am Kidir Abbas Hamid from Iraq. Now the sound is okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
the
you
sound?
sound
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, the region in the Middle East facing the climate change, like drought, water scarcity, and reduction in food supply to all of our countries. I think it is better to produce our food from our land. We must conducting the strategical programs to developing our cultivation in our countries by support of our government to sustainable of cultivation with less water or input and cultivating drought tolerance varieties with less duration to reducing in water use. I think it is if you doing this all of this program, we facing or reduce the effect of the climate change. Now you hear me, please?
Yes.
Yes.
We hear you.
Yeah. That's right or not? I ask you this idea, good or not good? If we produce our food from our country, that means we not affected of the climate change or the fighting between other countries, maybe close the trading of food from countries to other. I think the government put program for this idea. That's right.
Caroline, can I answer him?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Khadir. Shukran jazilan for your question. 100%. This is what we are calling food sovereignty. It's that we grow our own food and we have access to our resources. And Iraq is a very big potential to be food secure because they have all the resources to be food secure. And the government should take a lead, but also the people organizations should have a big role to push our governments into empowering our local food systems. So we have a role also to play. And as I said in my presentation, this region, the colonialists and the neo-colonialism do not want our region to be producing their own food. And if you remember, the foreign minister ex-Kissinger, he said, if you want to control nations, control petrol. If you want to control the people, control their food. So they want to control our food. And it's in our hands to act against that and to resist that. And there's a big role for our people's movements to work together in that direction. I hope I answered you.
Kadil, are you satisfied with the answer?
Hello, Caroline. There's a question at chat box, at the Q&A box.
Oh, yeah. So I'll read the question. The question is from Charles Ngige. And he's asking, now that we have realized food crises have been there since the past, what do we propose as the best way to address it sufficiently and completely? We have seen efforts with irrigation in Kenya, but these practices by the government have been a total failure. So, who will answer? Miss Razani, and also Gertrude, you can answer.
I think Gertrude can answer because he's talking about Kenya.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Charles, we have said that food crises have been there since the past, but we didn't say since the beginning of time, which means they're a creation of man. They're not natural. And the presenter, the main speaker, Razan, said, even put a timeline. She said that in the past 20 years, which means in the past 40 years, the food crisis was not a crisis. It was a food shortage, for instance. That's what I mean. Which means we have solutions for that. We can go back to our method. That time it was family farming as we know it. It was food sovereignty as we know it. We should not give up our space. We should not allow the corporate capture of us. We must remain active. We must remain activists to increase what they are doing. We cannot surrender corporate capture of our seats, corporate capture of our policy spaces. We must see that we mobilize our own money. You know, a way that corporations grab our spaces, take power over us, is when they end up funding our participation. That's one thing I've realized. When they fund your participation, you must dance to their tune. So there are lots of things. No one is going to give us the freedom we seek on a silver platter. No one. We are going to fight for it. And I'm sure we are already fighting for it, even by holding this meeting. And then you say, we have seen efforts with irrigation in Kenya, but these practices by the government have been a total failure. Of course, they have to be a total failure. If it's not going to be food sovereignty, if it's not appropriate for the peasant farmers, if the peasant farmer cannot function without going to a bank to borrow money to be able to produce, without going to the market to buy seeds, then it's not appropriate. We must keep our seeds. We must do the food sovereign, what we do in food sovereignty. We must keep control of our seeds. Thank you very much. I don't want to go very far. If I've left out anything, someone else can say it. I don't know whether you're satisfied.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Gertrude, for your answer. And also, Mr. Peter would like to answer.
Yes. Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. I'm from Mauritius. Okay. Are we prepared to change our lifestyle to grow food? Or should we always depend on farmers to grow food?
I didn't hear the question, did you?
Yes, I say, are we prepared to change our lifestyle and produce food? Or else do we keep on working and let farmers produce food for us?
I don't know.
If I understood well, our participant is asking, should everybody produces his own food or leave the farmers produce? Is this a question?
Yes, that was the question, because we have got a lifestyle where we don't care about our food, we care about having money. And from the money, we buy food. It's others who have got to produce the food for us. This is not a good way of living.
Okay, I understand that within one country, there should be people working in agriculture, people working in health, people working in construction. So the people who choose to work in agriculture, they are the people who are producing. Now we can increase the production by urban agriculture, where people also plant their communities and so on. But there is a sector where farmers are planting the produce. But if you are saying about a country producing its own food rather than importing, then I agree totally with you. Also, we believe in integration between regions, regional integration for production of food, because one country cannot be self-sufficient these days, but it can do its best. It's recommended there'll be integration rather than competition and between and money making between the countries. The target should be that a region will be fully secured, food secured. I don't know if I'm touched on your answer. Maybe Gertrude has something to say on that.
Yes. May I add something? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. Yes. So to answer him also, I know that there are lots of rural urban migrations, especially among the youth. And what is hard? Agriculture production is being left the very old. But make agriculture a competitive venture. First of all, we must guard our seeds. Secondly, we must use on-farm nutrient recycling so that our soils do not lose fertility and the production is not reduced. And thirdly, we must make agriculture attractive for the youth. What do I mean? When we are fighting for the rights of young people, we must look at rural areas must be electrified so that the young people can watch TV, for instance. The rural areas, the money that's invested there, in the past, in our continent, if you live in rural areas, you're taken like someone who's the scum of the earth. But we must change that attitude by making the rural areas attractive so that the infrastructure is very good. The infrastructure is very good. Our government must make our government account. And then we must dumping of food from the industrialized countries in form of aid, so that the prices of our food are high enough to be competitive, and the person can do agriculture. That's what I can say.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gertrude. And next, I'll invite Ms. Lai to ask her question.
Yes. First, thank you very much, Gertrude and Razan, for a very very good presentation. Thanks very much. My question is, can you elaborate more on the role of the IMF, World Bank in this crisis, how they contributed and worsened this crisis? And also, can you comment on the clamor from civil society for a new IMF World Bank model, which veers away from its imperialist roots? Yes, so that's two questions. The IMF World Bank's role in this global food crisis, its contribution, and then Any comment on clamor from civil society that the IMF World Bank should have a new model and veer away and go away from its imperialist roots? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lai.
Yes. Thank you so much for the question. Yes, the funding institutions, whether the World Bank or the Monetary Fund, have been playing to increase the poverty in the so many regions of the world. You know, I remember in Egypt, for example, they in the 80s they had sufficiency in food when the World Bank entered the game and started giving their recommendations and the the debts that they had, the Egypt had to be manipulated to push the country towards marginalization of their food production. This also happened in Jordan. For example, in the 60s, we used to export wheat to Italy for their. It was very well known for their macaroni, for their pasta, the Jordanian wheat. And now, when the World Bank came in, we are almost prohibited from planting wheat. We import 97% of our wheat, which is crazy. And as I told you, Iraq is the home of wheat. Now they do not grow wheat, and the role of these funding institutions is very clear. They give, for example, loans. They give loans to countries, and then the countries. Of course, we have corruption, and this adds to the problem. When they cannot really pay back the loans, the demands of these institutions for reform, or they call it reform. We call it, I don't know, destruction, or what do they call? But their demands are pushing mainly the countries to marginalize agriculture and to liberate their trade and to rely on imports, and to they encourage exports rather than imports. That's why in our presentation we said we have to go back to grow our own wheat, our own food, and to ask to cancel these loans which are enslaving us. So this is the role of these institutions, which is a very evil role. And the other question about the civil society offering a model, I don't think they lack ideas about models to be more to work more toward justice and equality and food sovereign countries. They do not have the political power because they are governed by the colonials themselves and the imperialists. So they are not waiting for a model. The only solution will be that people realize their strengths. They realize that they can make the change if they really unite, if they don't go into stupid conflicts between between religions, between the hell broke loose in our region when they started fighting the religions between each other. So it's us who should make the difference. We will never expect these funds to give us the solution. I hope I did answer you, Lei.
Yes, thank you, Razan.
May I come in?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to supplement what Razan said, that IMF and World Bank advance neoliberal economic policies. With neoliberal economic policies in place, they have a significance. For instance, they make sure they create situations where countries borrow beyond what they can. But Razan had said that he controls food, controls the people. So, like, if I lend you a lot of money, you cannot pay. Then there was three measures. What I remember was those measures of the 1980s, where there was a lot of job cuts in the civil sector. And if companies in my country cut the jobs and many people were jobless, they had to go back to do agriculture. Which agricultural prices were no good. So there's a deliberate move to control. That's the role that IMF and World Bank has played. And of course, the World Trade Organization. You can see that they are not after the prosperity of those regions that we have mentioned. Because if those regions were ever to be prosperous, then they would lose control of the whole world. Because they have nothing to bargain with. They have nothing to bargain with except greed, except lies. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we come to the end, let me ask the last question.
Cannot hear you.
Yes. Oh,
Gertrude, you might mute your phone because it's making.
yes. Gertrude, kindly mute your audio. So the last question is, how does an equal trade between nations worsen food crisis?
Hello, Caroline. Can you ask the question again?
Okay. The last question is, how does an equal trade between nations worsens food crisis?
Can you elaborate on your question? For me, I cannot. What do you mean by equal trade?
An equal trade.
An equal trade.
An equal trade.
Equal trade.
An equal trade.
Not equal.
Let's see.
I mean the imbalance of trade, or rather trade imbalance, how it affects the food crisis.
Yeah, definitely it affects the food crisis. It worsens the thing, and the WTO has played a very evil role in that. We have suffered a lot, for example, in our region from the liberation of trade, and we are prohibited from subsidizing the farmers, while in rich countries they do subsidize their farmers. So the trade is unfair. Our farmers cannot compete with the produce of the north. They are protected. They are empowered by their governments. So it really does affect, and it's something that we also should fight. Like we always scream it out that we want agriculture out of WTO. It's totally unfair, and it serves the purpose of the new colonialism.
Okay, thank you so much. We don't have more questions, and again, time is up for this session. And I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate you all, especially our speakers. Ms. Razani and Gertrude, and also our organizers, that is ILPS Commission 2. Thank you so much for this opportunity for us to engage on food crisis. And before I wrap up, I would like to raise some possible, campaign and advocacy responses for civil society. Number one, immediate campaigns for wage increase in welfare benefits, and protection for migrant workers and workers in informal sectors so that they can maintain their buying power. Would also campaign for ending the war in Ukraine as soon as possible and call for emergency supply of food reserves to countries and regions which are suffering shortages. With that, again,
Caroline, may I ask something? With the recommendations that you are raising, please add end all wars and aggressions. It's not only the Ukrainian war. Then you will be only if we only say stop the wars in Ukraine, we will be joining the double standards of the West. So you have to call for the end of all aggressions, all occupations, and then we will be on equal basis. Also, I have in my presentation some recommendations that I can send you, or maybe you have it recorded now, right?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes, that's very good, Razan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lai, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, so with that, the Commission 2 thanks all the participants, all the attendees in this webinar, and of course our speakers, Gertrude and Razan, and our volunteer interpreters. Thank you very much for giving us your time. And we hope that you will join us in future webinars. We plan to do a monthly webinars on global issues, socioeconomic issues of concern for the people. So with that, thank you and good day, everyone, and onward with our struggle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Bye
thank you.
bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, I'll close the webinar now. Bye bye.